Now, it's interesting. Gregg Wallace, right? Ever since this story has broken, that he's been forced to quit MasterChef over sexual comments made to 13 colleagues, or allegations of these. So many men, right? So we're like, what's he done? How bad could it be? You know, people are there going, oh my gosh, you know, is this just sort of the woke machine? Is this just a few un-PC comments and now the man's quit his work? Well, some of these are historical. Haven't times changed, you know? There's a lot of people, I would say men especially, who are kind of concerned about what Gregg might have done. Reading this article in The Sun, I'm sorry, Gregg, mate, it ain't looking good, is it?
If it's true.
Some of the allegations include that he held a female colleague's head and thrust himself towards her while she was kneeling down in front of him. Well, that ain't particularly good, is it?
No.
He's also accused of walking into the MasterChef studio completely naked, except for a sock pulled over his member. I mean, you know, that ain't a bit of, like, you know, how's your mother-in-law, is it?
Gregg's lawyers told the BBC it was entirely false that he'd engaged in behaviour of a sexually harassing
Entirely false, but there's a sockgate. Anyway, let's speak to Akil Ahmed, who's a former BBC executive. Do you know, before I read this copy during the advert break, I was thinking, is this the BBC sort of knee-jerk reacting because it has, in the past, made huge failings when it comes to certain very big stars and appropriateness of behaviour? You know, I don't even need to list them, but Savile, Edwards, Brand. But then reading this, you kind of think, well, what do you think's going on here? Is Gregg over?
Well, thanks for having me on. No, it's a good question. I mean, I think, speaking purely on a personal basis here, I'm like you. I was wondering, what's the substance of all of this? But when you read it, you know, obviously these are allegations and he's denied them, and there has to be an investigation and he could be found innocent, etc. But knowing some of the people involved and some of the things that have been said, it isn't looking good, is it really? And of course, you know, I don't think it's knee-jerk. I think when these kind of allegations come in, you've got to investigate them. And the fact of the matter is, they've done the right thing. The process is working in the sense that obviously he's been, you know, taken off her. They're not going to work with him while they investigate this. They have to investigate it. And let's be honest with you, if you're saying to me that Kirsty Wark doesn't know what she's talking about, well, I don't believe that, because Kirsty knows what she's... you know, this is a seasoned journalist. Asma Mir is a seasoned journalist. There are lots of people involved in this who give some of the allegations, you know, a lot of credibility.
Well, the problem is, if these allegations had a lot of credibility, they were being made over a 17-year period.
Yeah. So
we find ourselves back in a position where the BBC have protected a male star who has acted outrageously, especially towards women, made women feel uncomfortable. Look, I'm not a woke Me Too movement woman.
Yeah.
I really am not. She's some of the bands
we don't know, but I think that's what the investigation's got to find out, because he was originally allegations were put to the before. He was then given a warning, as it were, that this is actually made by a production company. It's interesting that the complaints didn't go to the production company; they've gone to the BBC. They've not gone to the independent production company. They're involved in the investigation. Now, I don't know what that means. You could suggest that previous allegations that have been over the last few years haven't gone beyond the production company. I don't know if that's the case, but it is interesting that they haven't gone through them. They've gone directly to the BBC. So we don't know. That's what the investigation is going to find out. What it looks like is that obviously there is an issue, not with the BBC. That you're talking about volume, right? There's lots and lots of shows, but we see this in this industry that often you can have individuals who have a lot of power, and so people around them are worried about what that power means. We've seen it with Schofield and all those kind of things, issues around people behaving inappropriately, and it's got to stop.
I mean, to me, it seems to be, because I worked at the BBC, I did my time in newsrooms at the BBC, and you certainly wouldn't have someone putting a sock on their member and doing some sort of, like, waggle dance in a, you know, BBC newsroom. That's not going to happen. It seems to me that every time we find... in fact, if anything, the BBC is one of those places where you've got to do 2-hour-long courses to learn how to stand up, sit down and type without hurting your back. But it seems to me the problem always flies around stars. it's actually the celebs here. It's the big male stars with their egos, with their pay, who walk into a room and command an audience because their name's up in big lights. They seem to be the perpetrators. We're not talking about exec directors or runners. We're talking about famous men who essentially get a bit too big for their boots and think they can get away with stuff.
That's the issue. I mean, there's too much power in given around some of those individuals, and they can do what they like. Now, we don't know what the case is with Gregg, and actually it's interesting talking about Celebrity MasterChef at times as well. Some of the people who complained are, you'd imagine, very strong, educated, powerful kind of women themselves. So it's a very weird one, that, because normally when you have that kind of power thing, you're picking on the lesser, the weaker, aren't you? And we've seen some of the allegations about some of those weaker kind of people, that perceived weakness of people who were worried about losing their job, worried about standing up against a star, and that's the whistleblowing thing that's got to... It has changed, to be fair, but it's got to just get better and better. This would have... When I first started work, there was a lot of kind of, I wouldn't say abuse, but a lot of kind of, misogyny and that whole kind of thing about, people who you were scared to speak up to bosses and to the on-screen talent. I think there's a lot less of that, but we've got to get even more of that out of the way, because otherwise, this at the moment we're laughing at Gregg Wallace, aren't we? And we're saying it's inappropriate, and some people felt really, really upset about the behaviour. But what it hasn't gone to, we don't, at this moment in time, where I believe, it's not beyond that. But it's when it goes beyond that, my God, that's when it gets really, really physically dangerous.
Exactly. But then at the same time, what people don't want to see is any sort of overcorrection. Akhil, thank you so much for coming on. Gregg Wallace, I suppose only time will tell whether it's been out of the frying pan, out of the kitchen and into the fire for you, sunshine.